The network relay stations scattered across the disk are all but self-sustaining. When a panel fails, when books become out of date, even when the doors just squeak a little bit, a speaker is the remedy. Ancient proverbs and modern fads agree. Colloquially, these living repositories of knowledge are known as wizards. In the early days of civilization, it was believed that speakers could harness unknowable power within themselves to shape the disk as we know it. Nowadays, people liken them to installation programs for their complete and applicable knowledge of truly arcane information systems. The powers speakers possess is not power itself, but the knowledge of power. Unlike those who learn only the names, speakers spend a lifetime deciphering the very language of the elements. It's not uncommon to find a speaker knocking on wood to entreat the forest, or throwing salt to discourage a trickster. In doing so, they defy the power of Ur, blunt as it is, and instead call upon local elements to reshape reality with the precision of a needle. While not universally true, the placement of many network relay stations was often informed by the traditional meeting spots of speaker circles. Called by a sign only they could see, speakers would join one another in these spots to share stories and learn from one another. This tradition has all but faded with the prevalence of the disknet. Speakers still share knowledge amongst each other, choosing instead to do so on their own archaic disknet forums. This isn't to say that speakers no longer make the trek to network relay stations nearby. In fact, for some of the most remote stations, the visitation of a speaker is the only use they get. Most speakers don't make these stations their home, as their skills are arguably better used in villages and towns. Still, some take it as their calling to man these isolated spots and to provide warning for the movements of Yama and powerful elements in the hinterlands. In settled lands, a speaker often acts as a caretaker of not only people, but the space in which they live. It is commonly known that elements inhabit all things on the disk, even that which is separate from nature. A speaker eponymously communicates with these elements when necessary, and cultivates their community in symbiosis with us as cohabitors. A common tradition in more populous regions, owing to the presence of more, and often more sociable, speakers, is the Spirits Festival. Speakers will capture an element in a large orb and share what they know about it with other speakers and even the uninitiated. The elements seem to enjoy the festivals too, watching folks intently as if entranced. Some claim that elements will inhabit an orb before the date of a festival has been chosen or the idea even conceived. The eye of a speaker is incredibly discerning. They look for knuckles well formed to create hollow knocking, or heels that jut out far enough to move the dirt in just the right way, all in service of stringing together the abstruse words of creation's language. The newly initiated novice, often called mumblers by the obtuse, will give their youth to the cacophony of elemental vocabulary. In return, however, they will have their mind open to a whole other world intersecting with our own. And they also get to fix squeaky door hinges. I hope you guys enjoyed our introduction of the speakers. Shout out to my friend Harmon for writing it for us. This project is a collaborative effort between a bunch of friends who just want to create something. So, about the character design. I was really excited to show this to you guys because character art has been my forte in the past. And I was a bit afraid the last few weeks to start drawing them because I didn't know how rusty I had gotten. And honestly, I'm really glad to surprise myself with how these turned out. The speakers are basically one of the main kinds of magic users that one would see within Ormauk. I initially started with the concept of network relay curators a while back, but halfway through designing the first pair of curators, I started imagining the type of person who would be leading the operations at a relay station. And that's when I got the idea of the modern-day wizard, more specifically leaning to a solarpunk wizard aesthetic. Since these relay stations are already repositories of knowledge, I thought, wouldn't it make sense for someone who is in eternal pursuit of magical knowledge to be living in one? The classic wizard's tower filled with books, but instead reimagine as someone who lurks on forums with other wizards bickering about proper magical conventions. From there, I kind of start to think how these younger speakers would work for the tenured ones as interns or assistants while they carry on with their studies. For their design, I wanted contemporary streetwear mixed with more traditional floral patterns. I thought that the traditional patterns were perfect in giving them a more rural citizen feel, but still pushing their fashion sense into a more modern era kind of feel. The female speaker has a very relaxed young professional office outfit with an eye-catching red handbag with minimalist design. That, plus the modern sports sneakers with muted colors on the male counterpart I specifically chose to give them, so you can immediately tell it's a modern-day citizen without having to see them in an actual modern scenario. Instead of bangles, tassels, and jewelry, these two specifically have a whole bunch of these ID card-looking things that I imagine they can use to access all kinds of arcane information systems within the network relay. Contrasted against the more modern-dressed, youthful speakers, we've got the tenured speaker, old and wizened through years of experience. This is where I really started to lean more towards the traditional wizard aesthetic combined with a more modern fashion sense. I really like this idea of a frumpy old guy with an enormous beanie on their head as a modern iteration of a wizard. I couldn't really figure out how to make that one look good, so I instead went with a harder looking hat, minimizing and modernizing the traditional wide-brimmed pointy wizard hat into a sleek bell-shaped form instead. Instead of robes, I thought it would be appropriate to give this guy a heavy-looking cloak to carry his various tools while out on the field. From here, I actually decided a direction that I could apply to not just this guy, but all the other magical characters I'll do in the future. I thought that the more magical a character is, the more I'll deviate their character design from the regular modern-day aesthetic to a more whimsical interpretation of a modern-day urban fantasy. I referenced a lot of high-fashion runways for this, but I ended up giving this guy an overall more 70s disco wizard aesthetic, which is still technically a deviation from the modern streetwear fashion vibe. Finally, we've got the kids. For these guys, I wanted to show what a Yatuan school uniform looked like. I didn't want it to look like our traditional skirt and shorts kind of uniform for kids, but I also didn't want the futuristic sci-fi tracksuits. Instead, I thought that if their schools focused more on hands-on learning, I could see them having to wear aprons for their workshops with cute little boots for going outside. I also like the idea of Yatuan schools, despite having some kind of uniform through the aprons and pants, still allowing their students to choose their own shirts. That's why they have different shirts, the two of them. The little girl wearing a more fun printed shirt with little puff-looking sleeves, while the older boy has a breezier sleeveless shirt. One thing that I think I failed to showcase in most of their character design is the more musical aspect of magic use. I'll perhaps hone in on that aspect in other character designs, but I did remember to add this idea in the form of the little kid's mace-looking toy. I actually thought of this as a traditional toy that would whistle a specific tune as air passes through the holes when you wave it around. I gave the instrument to the little girl because I liked the idea of Yatuan citizens exposing their kid to musical instruments at a young age to get them accustomed to music in general as a normal part of their lives. Overall, I was happy with how this one turned out. If you guys want a closer look of each character, I posted them on my other social media as well. I encourage you guys to zoom in and look at all the details I sprinkled. I especially love the flower prints I put on the woman's lapel and the man's headband. Let me know in the comments what other details you guys found interesting. If you guys had any questions about the characters or the speakers in general, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to talk about them more with you. Otherwise, I hope you guys like the Yatuan speakers and trainees, and hope you like the accompanying story as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.